Welcome to Inside Missions, a production of Maranatha Volunteers International, offering an in-depth look at the people, the cultures, and the countries where Maranatha is working. I'm Dustin Kahn, and today I'm joined by Maranatha volunteer Greg Hatch. Greg, welcome to Inside Missions.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I've listened to a lot of these. I'm
we
excited
have a fan
to be a part of
the
it.
podcast,
Yes.
on the podcast. I love it. Greg has led dozens of projects with Maranatha over the years through his church, the West Houston Seventh-day Adventist Church in Texas, but his influence and connections that he's formed have spread to other parts of the country, and now there's numerous Maranatha mission trips happening each year that can trace their roots back to him. So today, Greg, I want to talk about effective mission trip leadership with you. But first, I want to know, what is your relationship to missions? I mean, have you always been involved with missions?
So my parents got very involved with Maranatha as early as 1980. So my parents, Melvin and Karen Hatch, Melvin is brother to Roger Hatch, who's still a Maranatha board member, and Roger somehow got them involved back in 1980. Hurricane David hit the island of Dominica and basically just wiped it out. I mean, there wasn't basically no leaves left on any trees, and it was just devastated. So they went down there multiple times in the early 80s to help build houses. Maranatha built houses back then, as well as schools, churches, and a bakery.
And this was like, don't quote me, people, but I want to say it was like 180 houses. Like it was a lot. A big project.
The EEZ, the German West German Development Group, donated a bunch of money, and they helped with that. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
So they wrote me in as a kid, and I went down for two projects in Dominica where we built the second story on a school, and then the next year we built a bakery. You know, I was 11, 12 years old, and it was impactful. It was fun as a kid, but you know, that was it. And so my parents used to do 3 and 4 trips a year, and my dad would lead his church and open teams. And I never went on them because I was in school and starting my career and starting my family and all that kind of stuff. But it was always there, right? It was always, we'd always talk about it. I'd see the pictures, and it was fun to hear about it. And so then in 90, I guess it was 2000, Roger and my parents came down to visit I don't even remember what it was they came down for, but they came down to my church, and Roger pulls me aside and says, "Hey, I've got this project in Nicaragua, right? Hurricane Mitch hit Nicaragua, raised the water level of Lake Nicaragua permanently by 100 feet, which I still don't know how that happened, but it displaced this village, and the government moved them, and it was a terrible place, and it was a shanty town, and they built a church, and he wanted to build another building there by the church, which was half of it was a bakery and half of it was a medical clinic, so that the Adventist community there would have a way to make some money with the bakery and to take care of themselves with the clinic. And says, why don't you get some people from your church to come down and be part of it? It's like, hey, that sounds like a great idea. And so we got like 12 people. And that was in 2001, and we built that, and it was fun. It was very impactful, and I asked that core group of folks if they would want to go back, and yeah, we think it'd be great. So that was kind of the genesis as an adult for how I got into it.
And you were like in your 20s maybe for that, or?
Late 20s.
Late 20s.
You're being actually, no, that was early 30s. You're being very generous.
Yeah. People often talk about getting addicted to Maranatha mission trips. So when did you start to feel that?
It was that one.
That one.
So I was ready to lead one the next year, which would have been 2002, but 9/11 had hit. My company had collapsed, and it wasn't in a place to do that. So I just went on one with Roger and my dad to El Salvador, but I wasn't leading it. And then that following year was the first one that I co-led with my dad's church. We kind of joined forces, and we went down to the Dominican Republic, and that was the first large-scale leadership. I mean, the one that we did in 2001 was just 12 people, and we were part of a bigger group. But 2003 was where we really started, and that whole group was just hooked after that. We have a number of people, actually 2 people who are still going on my trips 21 years later from that trip in 2003.
Wow. You talk about Roger Hatch. I mean, he's a legendary figure in Maranatha's history. He's one of our board members now. What have you taken over the years from his example? I mean, how did he inspire you to be involved in this way that you are now?
Just his example of continuing to want to do it, and the passion that he has for it, and the energy that he pours into it. And there'll be occasions where he'll call me up and says, "Hey, I really think you ought to do this project." Okay, I'm not going to say no to Roger. And he's only done that a couple of times. Like, all right, I'll do it.
Do you see yourself in him, as far as now you're in the position where you can tell that young person, like, "Hey, we need you"?
It's a little different. He was looking at it from a leadership standpoint. I'm looking at it from getting our young people into a life of service. So it's a little bit different, but there are some similarities there, yes.
Yeah. It's just interesting that you now have this kind of program that you've created that is something that you are tapping people, say, "Hey, I need you to be involved. I need you to, lead." And how do you cultivate leaders within the groups that you form?
Well, it's different for the different types of groups. On our spring trip, the one that we've had for 20 plus years, our Mission is Possible team, Claudio Wilson, he just came back from Dominican Republic like 5 days ago. And for years we've been telling him, "Hey, you need to have your own group from Atlanta. You got enough people." And he was
in Houston with you and
then
moved away?
No.
Oh, okay.
A different person moved away and started the group in Atlanta. But he attends a very large church in Atlanta, and there's enough people want to go. So he finally did that. He stepped out in 2002 and then again this year to lead his own trip. He had been on scouting trips with me. I had started looping him in to that leadership process, and now he's doing a great job. It's different for our youth trip. What we try to do there is not to get them to lead their own trips, but for them to take on leadership roles within the trip. We didn't do it this last year just because of scheduling things, but usually we'll bring them out to our place and we'll go through a weekend of taking them through some leadership, how to be a leader, and just very small things on the mission trip. Like, you're going to lead out in worship. So you're going to lead out in scheduling Sabbath. You're going to lead out on the job site. You're going to lead out with supervision. You're going to lead out in VBS. And it's great. And we teach them some things about themselves, around their spiritual gifts, around communication styles. And it's great to see them. And some of them have, quote unquote, graduated to the adult trips, and some of them are really very involved and taking on leadership roles within our local church now. I'm not going to say because of that, but maybe due in part to, and it's just exciting to see the growth of some of our young people over the last 10 years that we've been doing these trips.
Mission trips have the power to really shape and mold young people into strong Christian leaders, and that is huge.
And it can be a spark to set them down on a life of service, right? A lot of young people, they don't know how the rest of the 90% of the world lives, right? And we're all very privileged to be here in the United States. And this gives them an opportunity to see that, to be more grateful, and to take on those roles, and to understand that there's a larger purpose for them being here.
Right. Talking about these youth projects, I mean, how did they start? Because you had kind of just a project that was open to everyone, and then you at some point decided to start doing a youth one.
So up through 2011, we would have young people on our spring trips, which are typically in March, and there was a very small attempt to try to schedule it around spring break. But it would never work, because you've always got the days on either side of it, because it doesn't fit neatly into 1 week. There's just not enough time. We would have some, but it got to be comical to try to schedule around. In Houston, you've got HISD, you've got our Adventist school, you've got private schools, and they're never on the same week. So we stopped, right? And we had a core leadership group within our trip and within our church, like, hey, we think we have enough young people that we want to start our own mission trip in the summer. So there was a lot of prayer, a lot of involvement from those folks, and that's what we started in 2012. to focus on young people and teachers because they can't go during the rest of the year.
True.
And we really wanted to make that a focus and to build a program around them. Even to the point where we had to find sponsors because, for a 14-year-old kid, for them to come up with, say it's $1,500 for the trip, they can't do that, right? And parents, if they have 2 or 3 kids, it's tough. So we found sponsors for them, and that was a large part of our fundraising is for those young people to start on that life of service. We have a number of people in our church that's a burden for them, and that on their hearts to help with that, and it's been a great success. It's a really fun trip.
To have such a long-standing program at your church means that the church is supportive of this kind of endeavor. You could go to a certain church and want to promote a certain ministry, and it gets shot down. So, what has the relationship been? What has the support been like from your church?
It's always been very very vocal from our pastors. We've had a couple of different senior pastors during that run. They're always very supportive of it, of making sure that our youth have the opportunity. I've been very cognizant to not have the church fund any of it, right? Because I don't want it to be seen as diluting or taking away from other ministries.
Sure.
And so it's always been very supported by everybody, but not necessarily financially.
Sure.
Right? Because I don't want to. Especially that because I was treasurer at the church at that time, I really didn't want it to be seen as diverting funds. So we would find outside sponsors for that.
Got it. Going back to sort of your initial adulthood experience with mission, so you were a part of. What was your first mission trip that you led?
So 2003, 2004, it was with my dad's church, the Columbus Eastwood Church. 2005. It was all my group except my dad was still a construction lead. So my first one solo, after my internship, if you will, was 2006 in Guatemala, and that was one that we did all on our own, and it was a little bit different, right? You don't have a net, but by that time I had found my footing, with my dad's help and others from the Eastwood Church that knew what to do, right? So I truly believe I needed that experience under somebody else's tutelage in order to find my way. I knew what worked for me. I knew the things I wanted to do. I knew the things I didn't want to do. And that was instructive, right? Because not everybody's the same. I am very different than my father. I have a much different approach to how I manage the team than he does. And I was able to crystallize that by working together for those first few years.
That's one of the beautiful things about Maranatha mission trips is each one has a different feel. Each one has a different sort of character and identity. It's I think one of the beautiful things about Maranatha. It's made up of a lot of different people.
And if people will talk about the difference between our spring mission as possible trip and our summer foundations trip, they're very different. Right. And oh boy, that's not what I expected. I expected it to be like the spring trip. Well, no, because it's geared towards our young people. It's going to be different. We have different protocols. We have different safety things built in for our young people to protect them. And you're not going to do the same kind of things you do on the spring trip.
Well, and even from mission trip to mission trip,
it's
a completely different experience. Even if it's the same leader, even the same country, it's a different mix of people, different project,
different hotel, different weather. Everything changes.
Curveballs come at you every trip. I'm sure you can attest to that. So on that first project that you led, you said in Ecuador, right?
Guatemala.
Sorry, we're getting to Ecuador hopefully later. I want to hear about that project. What were some things that you did or didn't do on that first trip that over the years you realized, hey, we got to do things a little differently? What did you kind of improve on?
That trip was a really good trip. I don't know there's much we would change on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the location was great. The team worked well together and we got the project completed. There were a couple of, so without delving too deep into it, there were some inter-team challenges that I could have handled better, and I learned from that. So that is the one thing I would have taken away as far as how we how I could have navigated that a little bit better.
And
challenges between team members.
Yeah.
And it kind of blew up on Sabbath, and that was not a good thing.
Well, and that is a reality of being a part of a team, you know, whether it's a sports group or you're in a classroom or in a church congregation or a mission trip. I mean, there's going to be interpersonal dynamics that come up that have to be. How have you found as a leader that you have been able to address some of those as they've come up since then? Again, without getting into too many details.
I'm not going to get into names.
Just in general.
It's first off, reminding people, why are we arguing amongst each other? We're here to do God's work. Let's focus on that. Y'all can argue when you get back home, right? And you know, set aside whatever beef you might have, and let's focus on the work.
So especially if it's nothing that,
if it's petty
and doesn't involve the actual work that's happening.
Now, if we get into an issue from a construction standpoint, it's what I say has got to go, and y'all just fall in line.
You got to resolve,
right? Yeah,
resolve it right there.
Yeah.
Speaking of construction, was there any efficiencies that you created from your first projects that you led until now? Because your groups are some of the most efficient and accomplish the most of any of Maranatha's volunteer groups.
Well, the first thing that we always have to recognize, it is not us, right? You know, we've had one block mason in 20 plus years on our actual trip. That's it. The rest of the people are physical therapists, doctors, nurses, whatnot. So it is not us. It has nothing to do with us. And I always remind our group of that, because they and me tend to get a little cocky, and we've got to remind ourselves, it's not you. You might have been on 20 trips, which means you have 20 weeks of experience, right? You're not even a journeyman at that point. You barely know where the bathroom is. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with our abilities. It's all about God working through us. So once we recognize that, we've picked up some efficiencies along the way. I have had to be a better leader in trying to anticipate. That's the main thing, is people waiting on stuff is a killer. You know, this most recent trip with Claudel, I had to wait one time for like 40 minutes, and it drove me nuts. I'm like, okay, this is what they feel like, right? It was instructive for me. Like, this is what my team feels like when they have to wait on stuff. And so that puts it on you as a construction lead to make sure you're thinking ahead. That's the thing that our team does a better job of now than what we did in 2006, is thinking ahead. We know a lot more now, right? And you know, the farmers insurance, we know a thing. We know a thing or two. We've seen a thing or two, and so we have a very veteran group of volunteers, especially on our spring trip, and they'll always sometimes not so subtly remind me that I need to do something to make it easier for them to get their work done. So that's what we've picked up is experience and how we structure our teams, and not necessarily being so rigid in job assignments. We tend to get a little fluid, especially towards the end of the project when we have to mix and match and, you know, make things right. So we've learned a number of things along those ways, but there's not any one magical thing. Yeah. Plus the projects have changed a lot since then as well. The evolution of the structure that Maranatha uses has been varied over the years. So.
How has your delegation evolved over the years from when you first started till now? And maybe this is even pre-project, you know? I mean, how do you set up your team and delegate now?
For the ministries outside of construction, I delegate completely. I used to try to help with a lot of that, and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing from Vacation Bible School. Nobody should ever listen to me for medical or dental, right? And so I delegate all of that. I'll give them the support they need, but I say, you need to tell me what you need, right? I'll get you all the information from the scouting trip as to how many kids, what type of environment we have, what type of illnesses people have, what help we'll have, and then they've got to run with it, because I have learned that it's too much for me to try to take that on in addition to construction leadership and overall coordination.
I think people who are considering taking a group on a mission trip look at their role as all-encompassing, and it can be a daunting thing to think like, I have to create and curate this whole experience, plus build a building and worry about transportation and, like you're saying, all these different things. But It really isn't, right? I mean, if you're talking to someone that is inexperienced as a leader and they're concerned about all those things,
find some help.
Yeah.
For our youth trip, because I was working full time back when we took that on. There was a very good friend of mine, David Remia, at our church. He's lovingly referred to as Jefecito, and he handles logistics for our youth trip because there tends to be more needs. If I wouldn't have done that, there's zero chance we could have the youth trip the way that we have it now, because he handles everything else, right? He'll deal with the hotel. He'll deal with the transportation. If somebody loses a pair of boots, he'll go find a size 7 woman's steel-toed boot in the middle of Bolivia, which he did.
Real story.
Right. And so that has helped me tremendously to have David on these trips. And even when he can't go, he'll help with everything up to the day of. He goes on the site visits with me. So that is very helpful to have that second in command. And I usually have that on all of the trips now.
And how does working with an organization like Maranatha help to take some of the sweat and anxiety out of these things?
So people at work, they'll say, well, wow, you have so much to do. You got to get all of the block. You've got to get all of it. I said, no, I don't. Right? There's an entire organization on the ground in country from a Maranatha team that handles all of that type of lifting. I am in communication with those teams on at least weekly basis. I've got a call tonight with our Peru team because I'm headed out there in 7 days, and just to make sure everything's ready. That's the magic of working with Maranatha on a mission trip like this, is you don't have to do everything. You have a team to help out before and while you're there, because I don't speak the best Spanish, shocking. And, making sure that is handled correctly and that all of the detail work is done, and setting up the hotel, making sure we have water, making sure we have all of this type of stuff. It's so helpful as a leader to have those groups and to build those relationships with them over years.
And you've mentioned these pre-trip visits that you'll do. A lot of times it's with those folks that are in country. What value do you put on those site visits? I
put a tremendous amount of value because I don't like surprises. That comes from my work. My work was all about project management. I'm supposed to mitigate risk, right? I view those site visits as mitigating our risk as a project team, as a leader, to know where we're staying, what we're getting into, the location of it, how long is it going to take to get back and forth. I like to be able to inform my team as to what to expect, better or worse, right? No, you don't have hot water on this trip. No, there's not air conditioning. And knowing that gives people a sense of, I won't say comfort, but at least a sense of knowing. And if you can work yourself up to whatever you're about to get into. And it's also great to understand, and I won't say build a relationship because it's pretty short, but to have an understanding of the local congregation, to see where their needs are, and to get them excited about us coming back, and to know that there is a group that's going to be coming that is going to work with them to help accomplish whatever we set out.
You mentioned the local congregation. How do you make sure that volunteers understand the context of the place that they're serving in, from, different cultural differences, socioeconomic factors, even just understanding their role in the big picture of this community that they're serving?
Yeah, well, part of this is going to be a plug for your work. Anytime that, like at Caggiato or at Camagoro, whenever those stories come out, I'll immediately send it out to the group. Hey, this is why we're doing this work, right? And that's why the Maranatha mission stories and these podcasts are very helpful for our groups to understand that context before they go in. But in cases where those don't exist, the why is important, especially for some of the newer generations. Well, why am I doing this? Yeah, I know I'm building a church, but why? I'm building a school, but why? I can gain a little of that from the site visit, and it's good to explain that to people so that they know that going in. We also, and it doesn't always work this way, having the worship with the church members before we even begin work. If it works out that way, sometimes it works out very nicely, and you're able to worship with them ahead of time. And it's great because you get a sense of how committed they are to what we're about to do. We had a trip.
And how much it means to them.
Oh, and how much it means.
Yeah.
And one thing's always stuck with me. We had a trip in Mozambique in 2009, and there was nobody to worship with because it was a school and there wasn't an existing group there. So we didn't get a chance to worship ahead of time. And one of my guys told me, and it's always stuck with me, it's like, yeah, I just don't have the same motivation this trip. Not that he didn't get a bunch done.
No, it makes sense though.
But I didn't get a chance to worship with him ahead of time. And so we try to do that where we can, but airline tickets kind of overrule everything. And when we find the reasonable one, sometimes it's not getting down there on a Friday to where we can worship on Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. When you have a 40-minute drive to the work site in the morning and it's going to be hot and you're out there sweating and cramping up and, why
am I doing this again?
Yeah. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. But this most recent trip that I just came back with Claudel and the Atlanta mission trip team, it was obvious. I mean, they were just so excited for us to be there. The pastor was so engaging, so welcome, so energetic.
Well, they met you guys at the airport.
They met us at the airport with a basket of flowers.
That doesn't always happen.
No, we've had that a few times, and but that was a perfect example of, he could look around and tell everybody. Now you see why we're doing this, right?
There's faces, there's names,
and they were there. This church in Los Trinitarios, they were incredible. They were there every day. You had ladies in bare feet and skirts throwing sand, sifting it. It was unbelievable, the amount of investment they had in their church.
And that's a true partnership.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes folks will show up into a community, they do the work, they leave, and it feels like, it was just sort of a one-sided thing, but being able to really get to know those people and working alongside them.
And we've had both extremes, right? This was the extreme on the great side, right? And they were super engaged, and you walk away from that knowing they're going to evangelize. They're going to tell all their friends and family, hey, I helped build this, right? I helped put this up. Come and see what God has done. We have the opposite, where we had a church, again, I don't want to name names, years ago, where I never saw the pastor. I never saw a single church member on that job site. It was okay. We know that God's going to bless it, but it just, gosh, you like to build that relationship with them and to know. We actually had on that particular church, we had the pastor from the year that we built the year before drive 4 hours.
Oh, wow.
That was Pastor Paulino, actually.
Oh, wow.
We built his church in 2013, and he drove 4 hours to be with us at that other location.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the great things about working with Maranatha. Some people will say, well, you're just going into a community for a week or two and then you're leaving, and then you're kind of abandoning it. So why would they want to, make these connections for people that are just going to leave? Well, Maranatha volunteers are a part of an organization that partners with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right. And there is buy-in from all three levels, right? The local church, the conference, Maranatha. And so you have this building that's going to stand. It's going to be cared for by the conference, by the local congregation. And so it's not just like a isolated group coming in, leaving. They don't know if the building's still standing a year later or not.
Or that it'll even get finished,
or
right?
Right.
And there are a lot of other ministries out there that will go and do this stuff and not finish. And 2 years later, it's still not finished. That's what I always tell people, especially donors. If for some reason we don't finish it, I know that it will get finished, right? I can guarantee you that. And that's very comforting to folks. And to know that this is not an operational organization, right? I think about from a lot of my clients, you've got the construction, then you've got the operations team, right? The church is the operations team, and people just need to understand that, and once they get that, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, things don't always go well on mission trips. I want to talk about a couple of situations where things didn't go as planned. One of them is, I want to ask where you were in March 2020.
Well, I was sitting on my couch whenever the travel ban came into place, and we were headed to Côte d'Ivoire. And I texted our group that night and said, hey, who's still in? We had 38 people who were supposed to go to Côte d'Ivoire. It's going to be an awesome trip.
And this is Ivory Coast. If people are, your French sounds great. That's the French pronunciation.
That's about one of 5 words I know. And so 30 of them said, we're still in, let's go. So we went, and we arrived, and, that was one of the best welcomes we ever had, because we were there that morning at church, and the elder said, brothers and sisters, the whole of Côte d'Ivoire has been praying for you to arrive, right? Because we know things are challenging, and you all came. And that was extremely motivating for the group. But Claudel and I knew right away, we got to get people home. We can't stay for the excursion. We can't stay for as long as we wanted to. So immediately on Sunday, we started working of how we were going to get people back home early. And so the earliest that our group reservation, that, we called the airlines and said, the earliest we can get you out is Friday. Fine. We'll work to Friday and we'll get people out. And so we stayed and worked, and we got the buildings finished. And half the group was going back to Atlanta, half of them were coming back to Houston. So 2 different airlines. And, the airline for going back to Atlanta was fine. And, Delta and Air France aren't going under, right? They're not going to go bankrupt. So there wasn't as big of a worry there. Our group, we were on a different airline. Again, I don't want to disparage them publicly, but they're on the no-fly list for me. I kept reading things about, are they even going to be around? And so we booked backup plans, luckily. And we had one of our group, they needed to get home early, and so they flew out on like Wednesday, and they were flying that route that we were through Europe. And said, why don't you ask them if they're still flying on Friday? And he asked them, this is on Wednesday, and they say, oh yes, sir, we're still flying. Don't worry. Tell your group not to worry. And then he gets to the location in Europe, and oh yes, that flight is still operating. No worries. The next day, canceled. But we had our backup plan through the travel agency on Saturday morning. So we saw the group out on Friday night, flying out on Air France, and all kinds of problems. Just, they couldn't find their tickets. They couldn't do this. And I'm getting a little frantic. And Pastor Gilberto and I are standing in the window overlooking the check-in. And, Claudel and Gina are texting me, hey, man, they're saying we can't go and all this stuff. And so I look over in the corner of the Air France office. There's this very suave-looking, confident Frenchman. And I say to Gilberto, I say, hey, let's talk to that guy. He seems like he knows what he's doing, right? I have no idea who he is. And so we go talk to him, and I love Gilberto. He speaks French, he speaks Portuguese, he speaks Spanish and English, and he talks to this guy in flawless French and finds out that this is the head of all of Air France's operation for Western Africa. Oh, well, he's useful.
Nice.
He's handy to have around. Yeah. And so he says, I show him the ticket, says, oh, I see the problem. And he goes back and solves it, and boom, they're through. And
wow,
it's great. And so
it pays to talk to different people when you're traveling.
And so Pastor Gilberto gets his information, like, I might be able to use him someday. And so we go home. We go back to the hotel, and so we're ready to fly out Saturday morning on our backup airline, and all is good. We get through security. I'm the last one to go through security, and I get up to the counter, and everybody's standing to the side. I'm like, oh, this doesn't look good. And the guy says, you leader of the group? I said, yes. He said, you're not flying today. I said, the problem on Friday night was they didn't have printed out tickets. He says, oh no, I haven't printed out this time. It's not a problem. He says, no, that's not the problem. It's your government. He said, they're not letting you fly. I said, what do you mean? He said, come to the back office, and he showed me, and, he says, are these your names? Yes. He said, well, your State Department has said you can't fly. And I said, why? He said, because of the travel ban. Did you fly through Europe? I said, we spent 2 hours in the airport in Brussels. He said, well, your government says you can't fly. And so I immediately called the embassy, because we never did this before. We've never visited the embassy. But when Gilberto had us on the site visit, said, let's go by the embassy.
Wow.
I've never done that, and I've never done it again.
Interesting.
So we went by the embassy, and we got their contact info and all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of cool.
This was months.
Oh, this is
before
6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
So I had their contact information, and I call them. They pick up on the first ring on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. Okay? Never happens. So I get the lady, and boy, is she a hopping mad. Not at me, at the situation. She says, let me talk to him. And so she talks at a very excited tone to the poor guy at the airlines. And he says, ma'am, he says, I agree with you that this is a misapplication of the rule, but it's your government doing it. He said, get me a letter. She said, I'm telling you to put him on the plane. She says, ma'am, if I do that, I'll have my license revoked.
Wow.
Right? Because I've done something your government said. He said, get me a letter. I'll get him on the plane. So she gets on the phone with she wakes the ambassador up. She wakes up people in the U.S. and can't get it in time, and the plane leaves. So we're obviously despondent. And so we go back to we can't go back. I couldn't handle going back to the same hotel because it was just not great, right? And
was there a moment where you kind of were wondering, like, hey, we might be here for
it was that
while.
moment. I was like, I told the team, I said, I don't know how long we're going to be here. And I'm on the phone with the embassy, and she says, we're already working on a repatriation flight, right? She says, we're working on it, maybe Sunday. I didn't know how long we were going to be there. And so I will cut the story short because that's the subject of an entire episode.
I was going to say, I'm going to put the link in this description.
If you want an entire story. But through God's working, through this gentleman that we randomly met that Friday night.
Was his name Jean-Pierre?
Jean-Luc.
Jean-Luc.
We got out by a miracle, the last flight out, commercial flight out. The repatriation flight wasn't until 9 days later. So
wow.
It's an amazing story. Go watch it. But that was stressful.
Yeah, if you want to see the visuals to all this story,
including Jean-Luc.
Yeah, and Jean-Luc is in one of the photos there of the episode. We have a whole episode on multiple groups getting out from different countries as the world kind of shut down.
Yeah, my favorite one is them taxiing down the runway in Peru, and don't have time to sit down. Wheels got to be up by midnight.
That was Burton Adventist Academy in Texas there. Yeah. That was they were taxiing, getting stuff in the overhead bins as they were moving down
sit down.
Oh man.
But we've had other challenging experiences as well. The one other one I'll tell you about, this was very impactful to our group. So 2007, we're in Ecuador, and this beautiful church location, sitting on top of a hill, and it's just great. And the pastor was wonderful. We had great help from the Maranatha team, and we get there and we go to the church site on Sabbath, and the church members want to have a meal with us, and so we oblige, and they cook for us, and they've got this wonderful potatoes and this corn, and they have cheese. It's I was not eating cheese at that point, so I didn't have any, but everybody else did. Come to find out, it was unpasteurized kind of farmer's cheese, and starting the next day and for the rest of the week, people were
my goodness, the
sick
whole
as a
week.
dog. It was, and we were at 9,000 feet in elevation to boot, and so we had oxygen tanks on the job site, but starting, I think maybe not the next day, but starting Monday, people started getting really sick. And we have some great pictures of people getting IVs on the way to the job site.
Oh wow.
During lunch at the job site.
Oh my goodness.
In the evenings. And so the photo we have on day one of the construction team is the only complete team photo we have. Luckily, we had a very good medical team there that trip. We also had our pastor doing evangelistic series. We had a full team that time, and it was great. But everybody was sick.
Oh, that's the worst.
And but we progressed throughout the week, and we kept getting work done. People were filling in wherever need be.
What a tough group. I mean, if you're getting an IV
at
lunch,
Gino, who's been with me the entire time, there was this great picture of him sitting next to me on the bus, getting an IV with a bag hanging up from the top of the bus while we're driving.
Wow.
Just unbelievable.
That's
I didn't get sick, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But the last day comes on Friday, and we're pushing to finish, of course, right? Because we want to worship there. And it gets to like 1 p.m, and we have so much to get done. For everybody who's ever been on a mission trip and worked with a block saw, those little diamond bits on the blade. It's diamond crusted to cut through the block. Those were all gone. Okay, so Ray, our block cutter, he's literally burning through the block, and then it starts raining and the electricity goes out. So he has nothing to cut the block with. And so we all sit down and pray. Not sit down, we stand up and pray. And we pray that God's going to let us finish. And so within like 15 minutes, so we were on top of a hill overlooking the city. And Ray, as a block cutter, he was always outside, and he said he saw a rain cloud coming, and it just kind of parted, went around us, and then reformed behind us. I'm not making this up. And electricity came on, and his block saw suddenly magically started working. And I look at one of our other guys and I say, hey, if you put the roof on, we'll finish the block work. And you ask anybody on that trip, time stood still for a good 2 or 3 hours that afternoon while we finished, and we got it finished with a sick, wet, under-equipped crew.
Well, now I know why you try to push to get things finished on every other trip since then, because you say, hey, if we know
that if God can do it when we're sick as a dog, when we're at elevation, when there's no rain, no electricity, and the block saw doesn't have any diamond on it, we got finished. And that proved to our crew, this has nothing to do with you, right? It wasn't us who got this finished. And so that was a turning point for that group to understand what it was all about.
Wow. That is one of the most delicate things is, do you accept food from local people?
Yeah.
You don't know
We're
how
all
it's
very
prepared.
wary. We're very wary, and we take a lot of charcoal.
That happens sometimes on our Maranatha Mission Stories trips where it's not a volunteer project. It's just us out there. And that's even, they don't have to make a huge meal. It's maybe just a few of us out there. And so that happens often. And yeah, you want to try to explain how but that's a kind of an insult. Their food might make you sick, but
I tend to err. I'm a vegetarian, and so I tend to, I can't have that. I'm vegetarian. Sorry. I thank you so much, and I'll have like a potato or have whatever that I know is pretty safe, and you just have to trust that they understand. Yeah. But that's one time it's really good to be a vegetarian, right? Because you know that there is much less chance of you getting sick with something else.
There was one time where Leo and I here were out in this Maasai village in Kenya, and someone presents a goat to us and slaughters the goat, and they want us to eat it, and none of us were going to eat it because we just weren't. And
right.
So then one of our guys there in Kenya was like, I have to eat it. I have to do it. So he's like, I'm probably going to be sick, but I can't. Yeah. Because we were going to be working with these folks, and so he didn't want the relationship to be soured, yeah. So,
like his stomach.
So yeah, so he did it. I think he was okay, but it's just, you're just waiting, after you eat something you're just waiting.
Well, we have that. I mean, like on our youth trips, the kids, they always want to get chicken or something like that. And we had a trip down in Ica a few years ago, and Maranatha workers are great. I love all those guys, and they said, hey, we're getting chicken every day. You guys want some chicken? So he approached me, and Mr. Greg, can we, Senior Juan said he'd get us chicken if we pay for it. And I said, I would not, right? There's risk in it. I said, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. And so this was like on Friday, and so they were sick on the excursion. Oh. So I keep telling them, don't eat the street meat.
Yeah.
But, people have to learn that for themselves sometimes.
Okay, so there's some of the negatives or some of the challenges. There's always problems that come up on mission trips.
But with those negatives, are always turned into positives, like in Ecuador. I mean, that dedication Sabbath was amazing because of that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you are able to navigate through adversity, it means so much more.
Yeah. What,
though, are some of your favorite parts or maybe favorite memories, and maybe those are some of your favorite memories?
The Ecuador trip absolutely is one of my favorite memories. So was a Côte d'Ivoire trip, right? Because when we were in the apartments there that the Adventist church had, which is where we went when we were waiting to get out of the country, I got a text message from the embassy saying, hey, there's an option that might work to get you out tomorrow. You all need to pray about it. This is a U.S. government employee telling me to pray. Okay, I'm going to do that. So the prayer meeting that we had that session, we'll all always remember that. So the challenges are the ones that we remember almost as much as the ones that don't have any problems.
Do we want to tease everyone and make them watch the episode, or
Oh, they need to.
do you want to finish
No,
the story?
No, we'll leave it for that. We'll leave it for that.
Okay. He's saying you got to go watch the episode for
That's
the
right.
resolution of the story. What do you enjoy most about leading projects, mission trips?
Well, for me, I enjoy the construction part, right? Because Maranatha is a construction-centric organization, and our trips are construction-centric as well, and I'm a construction leader, so that's what I enjoy, right? You enjoy what you know. And I particularly enjoy that last day, if we finish the whole thing or not. I enjoy that last day when we know that all of the block work is done, the roof is done, all of that is done, and I enjoy just kind of shutting everybody off while they're cleaning up, and I'll take on a very menial task, usually, getting the concrete off the floor, and just sit there and reflect on the week. It's just the highlight of my time is when we know that we're done and God is blessed, and hopefully everybody was safe, which most part they are, and we know that we've gotten the work done, and we're able to, and I know what's coming the next day, usually when we do the dedication. And those are my favorite parts, right? When we know that we're done and we're cleaning up, and the dedication.
Yeah. It's so satisfying.
There's nothing like it. And I always tell people, especially when we're like the schools at Caggiato, right? Because those celebrations are off the chain, right? And I tell them to be emotionally prepared, right? And to be ready, and to be ready for the dedication Sabbath, like what we just had, this last Sabbath. Be ready emotionally, because it will be very impactful.
How do you prepare? Now, a lot of the folks that come on your mission trips are veteran mission trip volunteers, but how do you prepare folks to kind of go back into their normal lives when they've been having this amazing mountaintop experience?
So we'll always have worship every night, and one of the things I'll always challenge people for is, you're on a spiritual high on this trip, right? You've had the time, you haven't had the distractions that you normally have, right? There's usually not great internet, right? There's no TV, and you have each other, you have the work, and you have your alone time with God. And I challenge people to continue that when they get back home. Always much easier said than done. But the challenge is there nonetheless to continue to keep that going. I can't speak for whether people do it. I have to, continue to do that myself. And I'm fortunate enough to get more of that alone time than what I used to.
Yeah. What advice do you have for folks that are out there that maybe want to take a group from their church like you have over the last, 20 some years, but maybe they're it's daunting to them to take on this whole.
Well, I mean, I like the mentorship aspect. That's how I view it. Those first few trips with my dad and Roger was a mentorship, an apprenticeship to understand, here's how you do it. Trying to do this, off the bat on your own, cold turkey, you can do it, right? I mean, there's enough Maranatha support where you can, but you're gonna learn an awful lot that first trip that you wish you would have done differently. Start small, get 10 people from your church, go with another group, get 10 people, go on an open team, right? And start that way. Or, tag up with somebody else that has done it and have them lead your trip for you. And then you're equipped enough to do your own, right? That's one way to do it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Maranatha does have at times multiple group projects where you bring 6 people, 12 people, whatever, and combine into a larger group and share some of the leadership.
And that's a great, proving ground, if you will.
Yeah, because you're still handling a lot of the same things that you would with a larger group. It's just on a smaller scale.
You just have a net.
Yeah, exactly. Couple more questions for you, Greg. Thank you so much for being here. You've recently retired. So I'm curious, how missions is going to even take a larger role in your life in retirement, or if you're just going to keep it the same, or how does that change things for you?
So it changes things. I mean, my desire to do more mission work and to do it full time finally overcame the love for my firm that I just left. And it's gonna take the form of more trips, right? The mentorship aspect that you talked about, we have 4 trips that we're doing this year, 5 if you include going up to Gillette. Next year, we already have 2 new groups that have approached me about helping them lead their groups. And so that's really what it's going to be, is finding those groups that are looking for, that they want their church or their group to do something as opposed to just an open team. They want to have that closeness of their group. So that's what it's going to look like, is finding where God is placing us to work with those and to help them along.
Yeah. You mentioned open team versus a group. Like, what, you've always done group projects? Have you ever done an open team with Maranatha?
Yes, I did. During COVID, we did that trip to Côte d'Ivoire. And we tried to do one in the summer with our youth, but it didn't happen. I tried to go back to Caggiato in 2020, but God made it clear we weren't supposed to. So I was missing something, right? And so I went on to... You
were truly addicted.
You're not wrong. Ask my wife. And so I went on 2 domestic projects, and so those were open teams, but I was just a participant.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a different dynamic.
Very
and like
different
you said,
dynamic.
If you do have a group that you want to really experience something together, there's no better way than to just take them on a Maranatha mission trip.
That's right.
Well, Greg, I really appreciate everything that you've done for Maranatha. I appreciate you being here. And just the example that you've set for so many people. You never know who's going to listen to this and who may be inspired to also get involved with the mission of Maranatha. And so, anything else that you want to leave us with? Otherwise,
no. People always ask me, are you going to, do something outside of Maranatha? I said, not if I can help it, right? Because again, what I talked about, I'm so grateful for the people on the ground. The folks that are in, Dominican and Peru and Kenya and all these other places that do the real heavy lifting, right? We just have to show up and lay some block, right? They're doing the hard work.
It's true. Our crews around the world are amazing, so dedicated, persevere through so many different challenges each week.
Every day. We do it for 6 days or maybe 7, and they're doing it every day.
Yep. Problem solving some really ridiculous, things that they have that they're confronted with. So absolutely. All right, Greg. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.